want to keep exercise 4 a little bit short because I know these get really long. I want to cover a couple debugging things and troubleshooting things real quick. I've heard from a couple people it's hard to know what the URL you need to go to in order to see your work is, because I totally glossed over that in the first video. And let's start by just starting everything from scratch a little bit. In order to get the server running, you should start by opening the main index.html file, the one that's in the Flappy folder directly, not one of the ones that's in the ex number folders. You open the main index.html file, and then hit run at the top. And you'll get some output here. It's going to start Apache. That's the server software. And the first thing it's going to say is a URL. You click on this URL, it's going to open a tab inside of Cloud9, but I think it's actually more useful to control or command click it so it opens a new tab. You can also copy paste the URL by selecting it and pasting it in there. But you can also just remember that the URL is the name of your project, which matches up with the workspace name, dash your username, with mine is Lenny Burdett, .c9.io, and then the rest of it is the path points to specific files in your project. So by default, it's going to point to the index.html file, which has nothing in it right now. If you don't put any path, that loads the same file. If you want to load a specific exercise, you type that in, ex1 or ex2. We're going to be working on ex4 specifically today. The other thing that I saw in class is some poorly formatted code, which led to some really difficult to find things. So let me force an error here. And Cloud9 will tell you that there are errors. But you might see it first if you go to the page and you do have the console open. Remember that you can get to the console by using the arrow in the inspector and choosing console. And it'll tell you syntax error, unexpected identifier. That's probably the most common one. That means, it probably means that something's either missing or added. That as the JavaScript interpreter is reading from the top of the file to the bottom, it's getting to something that it doesn't expect. In this case, this is an object, so it has a lot of, the bird as an object, so it has brackets that start the beginning and end of the object, then it has these properties that have a name, like x, or update, a colon, and a value, and a comma. So there's like 4 parts to defining a property. And I caused the syntax error by removing the comma. So the unexpected identifier is this draw property name, because it expected to see a comma before it saw another property. Not very useful error message, I totally understand. But Cloud9 will tell you where things are going wrong, or maybe where things are close to going wrong, because technically it's what went wrong is right before the identifier. Chrome will also do it. When it gives you the syntax error, it'll give you the name of the file that has the error, ex4.js, colon, and then a line number. So you can click on that, it'll actually jump you to the line number, and you'll see that it's pointing to the exact same place that Cloud9 was. So that's the easiest way to use Chrome to find things. But the most important lesson is to indent your code correctly. It's really tedious, I totally understand. But this is like really common to do something like this where I don't know, maybe this is all over here because you copied and pasted or you wasn't paying attention. It's really hard to tell that there's an extra curly brace there, because it's really hard to tell which curly braces match, which opening braces match with which closing braces. Because this one right now is matching with this one. Cloud9 is actually telling me this. It's kind of hard to see. There's a faint line around it. But if you click next to a curly brace, Cloud9, the opening one, Cloud9 will help you by trying to tell you where the closing one is. So this one that opens the draw function is matched with this one. This one matches with this one. So it looks like we have an extra one down here. So Cloud9 can help you, but it's so much easier to see if you indent things so that draw opens a function, opens new curly braces. So let's take everything inside the curly braces and move them another tab over. And then I'll match this one with the opening of the function. And then I'll see that this one still matches with this one. So if you do those things, if using the troubleshooting, I think you should remember is start the server from index.html, and you can always kill the server and start it again if things aren't working. Use the URL that's your workspace name dash your username, and then type in the rest of the path yourself for the particular folder that you're working in. I'm working in ex4, so I type ex4. Use Chrome and Cloud9 to find problems. They probably won't point to the problem exactly. They might point to the thing that is right after the problem, like a missing semicolon, a missing curly brace. They'll probably point to the next thing, and you'll have to include something before that. Use Chrome to identify it as well, and indenture code. Those are the most important things. So the lesson for ex4 is, I want to keep pretty short. It's not that complicated. What we want to talk about is the obstacle, which is the pipes that go from right to left and create the obstacles that you dodge. You already know how to draw something that moves from right to left or left to right. I covered that in exercise 1. You have an X property. If you want to start at the left, you start it at 0. If you want to start at the right, you start it at the width of the window. And then when you update it, if you want it to move right, you add X. If you want it to move left, you subtract from X. So that this .x minus minus removes 1 pixel, subtracts 1 pixel from X every time. And you can make it loop by putting a condition. You say, if, I'm going to put in some pseudocode here, if X is less than 0, set this dot X to the right edge. That's the pseudocode. That's what you would do, so that when it moves all the way to the left edge, you move it back to the right, and it creates a loop. So you can figure that out yourself. Drawing the obstacle, the version that I drew was very simple. It was just 2 rectangles. So you can just use rect. And you'll use this .x for both. And there's 2 rectangles, so you actually do 2 rects, right? You'll use this .x for both because they'll move together across the screen. But this .y will be different. One of them will start at the top of the screen, and the other one will start somewhere else. And the width will probably be the same because they're both rectangles are the same width. And you can play with this number, maybe 30, I don't know. But the height will probably be different because the top pipe goes from the top of the screen to some point. Then there's a gap, and then the bottom pipe goes from after the gap all the way to the bottom. If the gap's pretty high, the top pipe is short, and the bottom pipe is long. If the gap's low, the top pipe is long, and the bottom pipe is short. So you'll have to figure out some math to do that. I would consider doing something like having a property called gap y or something like that to indicate that it's the y position. You could potentially start it at the middle of the window, which is the height of the window divided by 2. You could then you start the top pipe at 0, and you go, maybe the height is this dot gap y minus, let's just say 20 at first. And then you start the second one at this dot gap y plus 20, a width of 30. and then you need to go all the way to the bottom of the screen. So I have to do a little math here. I'm going to do it off the top of my head and probably get it wrong. But if you take the height of the window, you subtract the amount of the gap, or the position of the gap, and then probably need another 20 pixels. Let's do this and see if it works. So that's the two rectangles. I'm going to adjust this if I got it wrong. And then another thing that's really important to point out is that you'll be drawing multiple things to the screen. You have the bird that you draw, so you would do bird.draw, and you have the obstacle that you draw, and eventually you'll have things like the ground to draw. And I chose to make the score another object that paints in the top corner, and you might have a background, you might have clouds, you might have other things. But it's really important to consider that these draw in order. The background draws white first, and then you draw the other things. So you might want the bird to be drawn last so that it's on top of everything else. These are kind of the layers of the art that you're putting down there. So it's up to you to decide how you draw them, but I would consider, you just make sure you consider that as you're putting these things in the right order. It's maybe not as important to put them in the right order for update, but it's very important to put them in the right order for draw. So let's just load this up. I'm going to put this back so it moves across the screen, and then make sure that I call obstacle.update in. Let's make sure we're passing the state to it for all these things. Make sure I call update in the game update function so that it's tied to the game loop. So, oh wait, I don't have a score or a ground. That's going to cause an error. So I'll refresh my page, and I didn't set my fill, so I'm getting empty boxes. But it looks like I actually got my math right, because the top box draws from 0 all the way to the gap, which I put at the middle of the screen, and then I made it a little bit shorter than that. If the screen is 640, then halfway is 320. So this is 320 pixels. You can even use the ruler over here. 320 pixels is halfway through. And then I subtracted 20 pixels. So this one is 300 pixels tall. And then this one starts at 320 plus 20, which is 340. So to get to 600, you have to 640, you go 640 minus 300 is 340. That's the position here, and you can see on the ruler it's right here. And what's cool about using this gap Y property is that you can move it up and down. Let's put it at 100. This will be higher in the screen. So now it's up here, but the two bars draw the same, covering the whole screen. I think that 20 is probably not enough. That's going to be a really hard game to do. So you might have something like a variable, a constant variable for gap size. And so 20 was not high enough. So let's try 40, and I'll replace all the 20s with this variable. So now it's bigger, and we can change it repeatedly just by changing that thing, that variable here. And so you have gap size to change, and then gap Y is something you can change. And one thing you might want to do, if I were to kind of put the pseudocode for if x is less than, this dot x is less than 0, then, do the thing. The other thing you might want to do is to do the thing to make it loop. The other thing you might want to do is change gap Y. So you can say this dot gap Y is some other number in order to make it move up and down. And there's different ways you can do this. A simple one is just to use the random function. So P5 has a random number called random. random number generator, sorry. And the random number generator takes up to 2 numbers and it picks a number between those 2 things. So you could say, make it, you know, random between 100 and 400, for instance. It's a naive way of doing it, but it's a good start. And then so every time it crosses all the way to the other side of the screen, it randomly chooses a new gap. So there's more for this for you to do, but I think you can figure it out. So hopefully this video is a little faster, and you can just rewind it a couple times if you miss something. So there we go.